Speak Out with Christine Jurgen. Today's episode, I want to tell you right now before we even get into it, is a good one, but it is very heavy. So if you have a little one in the car while you're driving right now, or if you have a little one in the room with you, you might want to pause it and listen to it while they're not in the room, especially if you have maybe preteen or teenager, you might want to listen to it and maybe they can listen to it. I'll let you be the decision maker on that with your own discernment. But today's guest is Landon Starbuck. She is a national speaker, writer, and advocate countering human trafficking, specifically child trafficking and child exploitation. Now you can see why it is a heavier topic and not for little ears. She is the founder and president of Freedom Forever, a nonprofit dedicated to protecting children from trafficking and exploitation and preserving freedom for all. She dedicates her life to protecting the most vulnerable, and we love her for it. She is also serving on the board of Operation Lightshine, an anti-trafficking organization in Tennessee that works with law enforcement to rescue kids from trafficking and exploitation. This is a message that everyone needs to hear, but especially parents, because it doesn't look like the battered and bruised female, next to a pimp necessarily when children are getting trafficked or exploited, especially with social media these days. My goodness, it's coming at them from every angle. But we have this idea, probably because of Hollywood, kind of what it looks like. And we're like, oh no, that can never happen. But Landon dives into it a little bit with us and talks about her work and what she does and what we can do to protect our own children. I think you guys are going to like it. But again, it's heavy. No little ears in the room. Okay, well, Landon, thank you so much for joining me today on Speak Out. I'm really excited to talk to you. I want to dive into the documentary that you guys just released. But before we do that, you have your own nonprofit that you founded called Freedom Forever. Tell me a little bit about that and kind of how you got in this whole arena of defending and protecting children.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I've been a longtime pro-life supporter, and I think that plays a lot into my heart for children and justice. And, I left the industry as a Billboard charting artist because I saw the exploitation, particularly of kids, of minors in that industry. And I just decided I didn't want to be a part of it anymore and take a step back. And I was asking God, what's next for me? What do I do with my gifts? And I studied a lot about trauma and exploitation and child trafficking. And at the time, I thought it was really just in Hollywood, an entertainment problem and, also a global problem. But I didn't really understand how it, shows up in our backyards and how it plays out in America and what American vulnerabilities and issues we have. And so I was volunteering with various organizations and learning the ins and outs, advocating for survivors, and then ultimately decided to start my own nonprofit combating child exploitation of all kinds. And we were the first nonprofit to really sound the alarm about the transgender push on children and how that intersects sexualization of children and how they play off of each other. And we took a lot of heat for that. And so that's something that, we want to rise to the occasion to cover the things that traditionally other nonprofits, the rescue raid model nonprofits are not going to cover, because it is such an important thing to bring awareness to combat, to change policy over. And so those are the things that we do.
A lot of people think of the rescue raid stuff. I know that there was that film, Sound of Freedom, that came out, and that's what people have in their mind. But you guys are doing a little bit more. You're still boots on the ground. You're doing stuff with legislation. You're educating people. So what is kind of maybe a little bit of a day-to-day of what your organization is doing, and how are you helping, maybe people who have been trafficked?
Sure. So we do ongoing survivor advocacy, and we have a crisis line to support survivors on that journey. And so, our work spans across policy, advocacy, awareness, education, all of those things. But to give you just a practical example of one of our big wins was combating child mutilation in the state of Tennessee. And we really led this effort doing our investigative journalism into the pediatric transgender Vanderbilt clinic, which then, our friend Matt Walsh then took and exposed further with his giant platform, which was amazing because we were able to then organize a rally together and really put pressure on legislators to act swiftly. And that is exactly what happened. So now we have child mutilation procedures banned in the state of Tennessee, including the barbaric practice of the hormone blockers and sterilization as well. So that's one win for us. But also we help step in with families navigating family court where child trafficking, child sexual abuse is present. We touch on the issues of unaccompanied minors that are being exploited, how our policies are enabling that, and how to reverse course. And currently, our biggest push right now is our petition. We're hoping to get 1 million signatures in support of the death penalty for convicted child rapists. And we're talking about ages 12 and under, the most heinous crimes that you can think of, because we really need harsher consequences for predators.
Yeah. So when it comes to the death penalty, there's going to be people listening who, maybe some agree with that, maybe some don't agree with that. I know that there's different people in the pro-life movement, especially that, have their own opinions on that. Give us the case for defending something like that.
Sure. Well, the death penalty is the justice a child was not afforded in the moment. And if you think of it in a practical term, if somebody tried to come and kill you and you self-defended, you defended yourself and they died as a result, nobody would call that murder. They would call it self-defense. So, this is a consequence for a opportunity to have justice that child was not afforded because they were overpowered by this predator. And in many cases, we're talking about years of ongoing abuse. These are not just isolated incidents. And even if they were, trauma affects children for a lifetime. I'm actually, working on a case right now that had me in tears this morning because this child still, wets the bed every day, still has trauma triggers every single day at seeing a person who looks like their offender. This trauma is so difficult to break. And it follows a child for a lifetime. And if you speak with survivors, they will validate that. And many survivors are helping lead this effort for accountability. One of the biggest problems is that these predators are so emboldened. We've seen in California, thousands of convicted pedophiles who've raped children repeatedly have been just let go. So these lenient policies are not working, and predators have never been more enabled. And as a result, we've never seen an increase like we have in child exploitation, trafficking, and abuse cases that we're seeing now. I mean, we have over 32 million reports of suspected online sexual abuse of children in this country, and that's just happening online. These cases haven't even been addressed. So predators need the message that if you harm a child, if you rape a child, you not only are not going to be able to do it again, but you will never have the opportunity to be out in the public and be a threat to other children again. So, that's my argument. My main argument is that the justice part, it's not even about can a predator be rehabilitated. It's about the crime and the consequence.
Yeah. I would agree with you. I'm like, there is nothing too harsh for somebody who is willing to harm a child. But I know that there's going to be people listening that have a different opinion maybe, and I want them to hear that perspective. So when it comes to sex trafficking, oftentimes we think of like, a pimp and, a battered and abused girl. Are there a lot of times where sex trafficking is happening right under our nose and we don't even know it?
Absolutely. And that's really, I think it's the culture that increased the rates of familial trafficking. And, most of these traffickers are people that the person knows, the victim knows. It's not the man in the van. It's not somebody that they, met 10 degrees to someone else. It's somebody in their world already. I mean, we just saw this case out of Houston where a teacher and her son were actively trafficking students. What? So, and nothing was done about it. I mean, they reported this, multiple teachers reported to the school board or the school administrators, and nothing was done. So we have a cultural problem that is enabling this. And that's why we need cultural fixes in addition to a policy, not just awareness of the signs of trafficking. We really have to be paying attention to what's going on in our schools, what's going on with our kids and their friends, and things like giving kids social media before they have the digital self-defense skills puts them at significantly higher risk because we know most of these crimes are being perpetrated, carried out, facilitated online to some extent. So these are things, if we know, we can do better. And, that's what our work is about every single day, is empowering parents, equipping them with those skill sets, and understanding that we all know somebody who's being trafficked right now. We all know someone who's being sexually abused. And that also means, unfortunately, we all know pedophiles and predators. We just can't see them. So we have to know how to look for the signs. We have to be proactive about sexual abuse prevention in schools and any environments, and vetting influences and environments that we send our kids to, digital, online, in person, whomever.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up the school because I read something recently. I used to live in Colorado. I'm in Alabama now. And I read something recently about a school in Colorado where there were teachers or school staff of some sort that were taking a girl off campus and she was being raped somewhere else. And the parents have brought it up, but they're too afraid to bring charges or, do any sort of further investigation because they're illegal immigrants. So it's almost like they're preying on these families who are afraid of being deported, and they're abusing these children. And it's something that I read about. I was like, no, that can't be the case. And apparently through the grapevine, I know someone who is connected to this family, and they're saying, no, yes, our daughter has been raped by people in this school. Like it's happening, not only with schools, but like you said, things are happening at the border. There's children coming across who are being raped. There's something that's called rape tents that I saw. What is that?
Well, those are, rape tents typically at the border. I organized one of the largest border coalitions years ago, exposing the horrific trafficking that was just happening out in the opening through our open borders. There are rape tents or rape trees. Basically these children are abused because nobody's protecting them, nobody's interceding. And anytime a child is vulnerable, predators will come and exploit them and abuse them. And so the reason this is happening so much at the border is at the time it was a lot easier to get in if you had a child with you. It was very lucrative too because you'd have these matching these bands. It's a very highly sophisticated operation that these cartels run, trafficking children into the country. And even once they get into the country, HHS, we've had whistleblowers. My friend Tara Rhodes exposed this. They're not vetting who these children are going to. So they're being shipped out all over the country. And we're hearing reports of sexual assault within these units, these attainment facilities, Catholic Charities, rape's been reported there. So it's almost impossible to follow up on these as an advocate or as an organization because there's such a lack of transparency. But children, who are undocumented, unaccompanied minors are at significantly higher risk of trafficking and exploitation. They've lost track of a third of them. It's horrific that there's no accountability.
So what can parents do to protect their children from grooming, sex trafficking, all of this stuff that we're talking about? I'm a mom. I have a 16-year-old, I have a 7-year-old, I have a 4-year-old. I know that there's other parents that are listening. What are some steps that we can take to protect our kids?
Well, we have similar ages. I have a 15-year-old, a 11-year-old, and a 7-year-old. It's a full-time job just protecting our children in 2024. So, I wrote something called the Parenting Revolution Manual, and it's free when people subscribe to freedomforever.us, my nonprofit. And I outlined some really just concrete steps that we can take, ways that we can protect our children, like non-negotiable things that we all need to be aware of that are happening, ways to get involved, alternatives to, dangerous media that grooms our children or indoctrinates them into certain belief systems that render them more vulnerable to exploitation and to keeping secrets and all of those ideologies that facilitate those dangerous things for kids. It presents everything there. So I would really encourage people to download that for free. But the biggest thing I think that I've been sounding the alarm on for a long time when it was really unpopular is social media was never intended for kids. It's not for kids. And kids are, like I said, trafficked, exploited every single day on these platforms. Snapchat was originally for sexting back and forth. That's why it was created by these frat boys. And till this day, it was designed so that the chat disappears and the evidence disappears. Till this day, there's very little accountability. So when a child uploads nudes, which is very common now in our culture, there's no guarantee that you can ever get them taken down. There's services, NCMEC, the National Center for Missing Exploitation, has a service, but there's no guarantee you can ever get these taken down because just the way that the internet works and global ordinances. So kids need to be aware that it's never okay to send nudes. And unfortunately, we have these radical sex ed programs that say it's okay to send nudes, encouraging people to send nudes as a means of showing affection to one another and a means of sharing your sexuality. and it's incredibly dangerous. It's used to extort kids. Kids are committing suicide every day all over the world, and they need to be informed of those dangers, and parents need to have those discussions and not put kids in any environment, whether it's on a digital device or, with a soccer coach unsupervised, in any environment before they vetted it, and that kid has the skills and the language to be able to safely exit that situation or navigate that situation. And in my belief, it's under 16, it is not appropriate for kids to be on social media or have unfettered access to the internet.
Yeah, that's good. I love what you're saying. I actually just had somebody on recently. I don't know which order the podcasts are going to come out in, but we're talking about social media and electronics and kids. And they say delay is the way. Like obviously you're probably going to have social media at some point in life. That's become the new town square. But the longer you can hold off, the better. When it comes to sex trafficking, how does Planned Parenthood and abortion aid and abet sex trafficking?
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up, because this is something, again, I've been talking about for so long, and it was awesome to see organizations like you guys and others do these more in-depth exposés that we really needed, that camera footage showing the actual experiences of what so many survivors have been talking about for years. And Planned Parenthood really is a one-stop shop for predators and traffickers to, what they say in their own words, maintain their merchandise. So it facilitates and enables traffickers and pimps, or they're pretty much the same thing, by going in there, or incest or any type of child sexual abuse, by going in there, and they're not, even though they're supposed to be mandated reporters, depending on state law, they're not reporting when children are coerced or there's somebody with them and they're being forced to lie on a document or being forced or coerced into abortions. They're not reporting these things, and they should be. They should be, especially the fact that they want to be healthcare facilities, designated healthcare facilities. So they should be held to a higher standard. And we've seen so many children go through that system, be trafficked, and their abortions, the evidence of that crime rate happen at Planned Parenthood, and they're happy to facilitate that. And they're happy to facilitate secrets, starting in how they're embedding themselves in the school system, telling children they have the right to their own health care decisions. We're seeing mature minor doctrine implemented in a lot of these states as a soft trial for that transition of consent, where they want kids to be able to consent. And they actually believe children are sexual beings and that they have the ability to consent. And that's why they're pushing the gender ideology, because that's their new cash cow with all these hormones. But it's a pipeline that'll eventually end up in some type of sexual activity at a young age, or sexual exploitation or abuse.
Yeah, I try to tell people that Planned Parenthood pretty much is behind most of comprehensive sex education. They write it, even if it's under another name, because a lot of parents, when they hear Planned Parenthood, they're going to have a red flag go off. So they'll put it under another name, or Planned Parenthood partners with these organizations. But nobody believes me when I say Planned Parenthood is writing comprehensive sex ed. That's what's happening, right?
Absolutely. And our film touches on this a little bit, about the global push. Planned Parenthood International, IPPF, is really where all of these radical ideas started. And of course, they start in the most vulnerable African countries, where people can't fight back or push back because they're blackmailed with aid. But they are pushing this high-risk sexual lifestyle on these communities. And one of the things I remember reading years ago was this pamphlet, an educational pamphlet called Happy, Healthy, and Hot, in which they encouraged an already rampant HIV problem. They encouraged the children in these villages to not disclose their HIV status, that they had a right not to disclose, that they had a right to being sexual and to engage in whatever sexuality. Bestiality was another one that they endorsed. So they beta test all of these horrible, destructive ideas in the most vulnerable countries, and then they import them wherever they can get them, funded federally, with our taxpayer dollars, to get these radical programs in school.
That's disgusting. I mean, the preying on innocence is what we're seeing more and more of. And it's so repulsive to me. And I hope that everybody listening is opening their eyes to what's actually happening, because it is. So you guys just started a new documentary called The War on Children. It's a phenomenal documentary that I think everybody needs to watch. Even Elon Musk reposted it and was like, this is a great watch. I forget exactly how he framed it. But tell me what this documentary is about and kind of what you hope that people gain from it.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's been amazing because we independently put this out, my husband and I and our team, and over 50 million people have downloaded it. And that's without any advertising dollars spent because we couldn't even advertise. It was so
Yeah.
censored. I mean, I just think that's amazing. And we give all the glory to God for that because that's just a miracle in this day and age with all the censorship that 50 million people would somehow find their eyes on this documentary and be convicted to watch it is just amazing to me. I still can't wrap my head around that. And I think it's a big win for parents because the more parents are empowered, the more families see this film or anyone who cares about kids, the more we're better equipped to fight the enemy. And there is an enemy. There is a war on children. And this film makes that case that from every angle, every pillar of culture, from academia to the medical establishment to our government, how they're all complicit, education system, in this destruction of innocence, in stealing children's childhoods, in destroying the nuclear family. And we do it with interviews with experts and people in their own words and using facts. And it's interesting because I would have thought that the left-wing media would have attacked this film just simply because we're Christian conservatives, but also to be able to, the fact that they couldn't poke holes in it. I mean, it's unassailable factually. The stories in it are so powerful that they couldn't really attack it. And so they chose not to, with the exception of Rolling Stone. But that's really, parents need to see this film to be equipped and empowered to know what's going on and to get ahead of it. And that's also why I wrote the Parenting Revolution Manual, so they wouldn't just see this film and drown in the heaviness of it, but that they would be empowered to take action and have that guideline to do so.
Yeah, the how is so important because I know a lot of social media, it's kind of fear driven a little bit. I mean, I say that, but it's like things that parents need to know. So we see all this stuff on social media and parents are like, okay, I'm scared of this, I'm scared of that. This is happening. I have to be prepared. I have to be prepared. But not very many people are giving them the how and telling them how to protect their kids and what they can be doing and steps to take. So I think that's really important. So in the documentary, you called Dr. Lori Batita, and she's the founder of Pornhub's sex ed program. What did she reveal to you about their sex ed program?
Well, I mean, there is a much lengthier interview that I hope we can release in full that didn't make the cut for the film. But it basically highlighted everything that we talked about earlier and, on this podcast, is that Planned Parenthood has an agenda to use comprehensive sexuality education to indoctrinate and create new customers. It's a pipeline. And their belief is fundamentally, underpinned by Alfred Kinsey's work and this idea that children are sexual from birth. And we know, from, I'm sure you've covered this on your program, Alfred Kinsey's history, that he was a prolific predator of documenting the rapes and torture of children as young as infants. And, the fact that they base their entire ideology off of this very flawed science and flawed work, that it was predatory and abusive in every way, it really is indicative of the entire movement. So that's something that I think people really need to be aware of, is the connection between the push for radical sex ed and all of this depravity happening in the schools.
So are Planned Parenthood and Pornhub partnering together?
Mm-hmm. Yes, in many ways. I mean, it's not a formal partnership, but one of the things that they said is, we don't promote Pornhub, but Pornhub has been promoted. They have run ads, and there's a bunch of radical sex ed educators where they will give them prompts and give them instruction of how to essentially promote porn, what they call ethical porn. So they do it under the auspices of, we just want, kids are going to see porn. We want to make sure that they recognize that it's not real, but they're coming from a perspective of, we don't want you to feel less than when you don't look or act like this. They're not coming from the perspective of what you're watching could very likely be sex trafficking victims, and this is not normal or healthy behavior to simulate, child simulation or any of these disgusting, like, fringe things that they teach them not to judge. They're coming from a very different perspective with that, and that's why parents buy into things, is they think it's medically accurate or evidence-based and that it's designed to teach them about the dangers of porn, but that's not what the angle that they take. So it's very much, when they are promoting that, they're also talking about abortion and where can you get an abortion. It goes hand in hand with how they teach it, but it's very surreptitious the way it's all knitted together.
Yeah, well, if you have abortion, then it's much easier to keep a client working. If you have a porn star, you just keep her going and going. So the founder of Pornhub, when you were talking to them on the phone, the sex ed program, the founder of sex ed program, I should say, suggested that children are inherently sexual and then threw out the age 18 months as a reference. I mean, these people genuinely believe that 18-month-olds, toddlers are sexual, inherently sexual.
Right. And she made the point, I don't want to misquote the exact quote, but it was something to the effect of like, sex ed is for everyone, young as kindergarten should have sex ed. Her belief is that, but what is sex ed and who's teaching it? Again, this is where they surreptitiously, run cover for Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood is the biggest sex ed operator and initiative and a well-funded, plan in America. And it's already in so many schools. And sometimes they'll try to hide it, the curriculum, and have different, other affiliates like Advocates for Youth. But again, what are Advocates for Youth doing? They're making videos promoting abortion. And again, where do they lead people? They lead people to Planned Parenthood or to pornography. So like I said, it's like a very disgusting, incestuous triangle that they all kind of enable with one another.
Yeah. So when it comes to like all that's happening and all that we've talked about, I feel like there's so many adults who are just allowing this to happen. Like, has something happened to us as adults, or that we're making excuses for this? Like, how is it happening that people are seeing this and they're saying, well, children actually need to learn this because, like, where is this even coming from?
I think a mass desensitization happened, and it's a result of letting our morality decay and it not matter anymore, right from wrong. And this idea, this bigger idea of objective, subjective morality, of moral relativism was really introduced in upper academia, and that trickled down into the national education standards from which all children are now subjected to. And that's this idea that don't judge anyone because their reality or their truth is different. It's the same cultural, phrase like, you do you, boo, don't judge anyone. Yeah. That removing that was in one swoop was removing morality, because now why is pedophilia wrong? If it's just how someone is born or identifies, it's no different than being trans now, according to this ideology. If you identify as a different age, it's no different than a different gender, because it's all about subjective interpretation, because in moral relativism, there is no foundation of truth. And that's really where we went wrong, is ignoring the truth, ignoring that our spiritual foundation in this country, our values, all went out with that when we accepted that moral relativism under the auspices of tolerance. So that's really where I think we went wrong, because it's not, at this point, I don't blame the evil ones doing this. I don't blame them at all. We know what they are. They're showing us who they are. They're showing us their agenda. But we don't see enough good people, righteous people standing up boldly for their values, declaring truth despite the consequences, to fight for this next generation. And that's what we need to see more of.
Yeah, so it increasingly seems like a left versus right issue to protect the innocence of children to me. Why are we seeing more people on the right going to protect children and less people on the left thinking that they need to protect children? How has it become a political thing almost?
I mean, well, everything has become a political thing. I think that's part of the agenda, to divide us. But sadly, it's true. I mean, when it's not honest to say that these issues aren't political. Everything has become political because everything's connected to a policy that either harms or helps people. And as we've seen, there's so many destructive policies on the left that are rendering, victims without resources, that are offering lenient sentencing or no sentencing to the worst crime offenders in our country. So these things are having direct, effects on our most vulnerable. So I think that that's the biggest, issue that we're seeing, is politics do play a role, and people don't want to wash their hands in politics because it's just a dirty word. But really, it's our moral duty to be involved in the public square and our governance, because if we don't, these people will take over.
Where does the desire to exploit kids come from? Is it financial? Is it sexual? Is it control? What is it?
I believe in good and evil. I mean, how else do you describe some of the most horrific things that are happening to children? I mean, I just read a story where a mom left her child for weeks so she could go on vacation with her boyfriend. Like the selfishness and narcissism as that child rotted away in a crib screaming. That is evil. There's no other way to logically or intellectualize or psychologically explain how someone can do that to their own child. So there is evil running rampant in this country. When we have fathers raping their own daughters, filming it and selling it for money, this is evil. There's no way else to explain that level of depravity. So that's what I believe is happening.
Yeah, this is such a conversation that needs to be had, but it is so uncomfortable hearing some of these things because it's like, how could you do something like that to your own children? How could you abandon them and leave them for days on end to starve? And God, it makes me so emotional and enraged because I'm thinking, just if I could bring them to me, like just drop your baby off. I will take your baby. I will take care of them. And I know that there's so many other people who think that way, but my God, we have got to do better about supporting children and protecting children and even parents, educating them on all of these things, how they can protect their own children. So you're a mom and you have children. Obviously, we just talked about your kids' ages a little bit ago. I want to talk maybe just a little bit about motherhood before we go here, because I know there's a lot of people listening and, they're inspired by what you do. Maybe they want to get involved or something along those lines. But I want to talk about how you teach your children about these things and what you do on a day-to-day basis. Because I know a lot of people look at people like you that maybe you don't claim the influencer title, but you have a lot of influence and you have a company that is making waves. How do you juggle motherhood with the activism? Do you send your kids to public school? Do you homeschool? Kind of all of these things, motherhood. Give me like the behind the scenes of Landon Starbuck.
Well, I mean, as a mom, I've made a lot of mistakes. I've sent my kids to woke schools thinking it would give them a better education and chance of getting into a better college. I've sent my kids to public schools where they tried to force mask them and we ended up leaving. I've homeschooled my children for a period of time, and now my children are at a small Christian private school. I've learned a lot from my mistakes, and I try to share that because I want to help other people navigate that world and understand that when we say things like homeschool your kids or pull them out of public school or even private school, because a lot of private schools are not much better, it's not coming from a place of like judgment or, I'm more privileged so I can do this. It's coming from a place of I've made these mistakes. I see the dangers and the ramifications it can have on your family and on your children. And there's no price worth paying to jeopardize your children's innocence and their childhood. And there's no greater influence that there should be on our children than us as parents. And we are their number one educators. So to some extent, we should all be homeschooling because we are their most influential figures in their lives. And so, that's kind of shaped a lot of my views of why I support things like school choice, because I want every child, regardless of their zip code or who their parents are, to have access to an education that fits them the best, that if they have special needs or if they're into the arts or whatever it is. That's something that I really strongly support. And it's also a means of combating a lot of the other issues that we're seeing, because we know that vulnerable kids living in poverty without access to good education are more vulnerable. And the same goes for kids who are stuck in these failing woke schools, if you will, that are just prioritizing wokeology instead of, reading, writing, arithmetic, all the traditional things that kids need to learn to be, successful. So these are things that I think are really important, and I've made these mistakes, and so I try to take my mistakes and educate parents from that perspective. At the very least, it is our responsibility to vet any environment or any influence that our kid is exposed to. So at some point, it's not the school's fault that our kid got sent home with some pride homework or whatever it is that's upsetting us. It's our responsibility. And once we realize our power and that we do have the power to take our children back home or to another situation, or at least make a plan, whether we have to move, whatever it takes to protect our children, it is worth it, because the stakes have never been higher for the destruction of children's innocence.
Yeah, that was actually something I was going to kind of lead into. So your kids are at a small private school, and sometimes private schools can go woke. So what do you do? Like, what does it look like for you to stay on top of their education, maybe in touch with their teacher, the administration, all of that? How do you stay involved to know what's going on in the school?
Well, what's great is like at this point, there's such a strong trust relationship because I know who the people are running the school. I know their hearts. I know their values. And I think there's part of a barrier of a lot of the time we're sending our kids to an environment with someone, a figure for 8 hours a day that we don't even know. We don't know if they're doing
strangers.
OnlyFans at night. We don't know if they're, having sex with a kid in the class. We don't know. And these things are happening. I mean, we've never seen more teachers in trouble with the law for exploiting kids and sexualizing them. So if we don't know the people we're leaving our kids with, it's no different than just leaving them with a stranger because they have some sort of credential. And the same goes for doctors, not leaving your child, at the doctor. So it's changed the way I think about everything because if I don't know the person, I don't really know who they are, I'm not going to feel comfortable sending my kid to a doctor, to whoever, whatever environment it is, if I don't know them, if I don't know the parent, if I don't know, their rules in their house about social media, all of those things. And that is my responsibility. And I didn't always take that responsibility serious with my oldest. I trusted when we sent our kids to the best private school in California. I trusted that when they said we're teaching them social emotional learning, that was some sort of way of, enriching them socially so that they would be more emotionally attuned to other people and their needs and tolerant and all those things. That's what I was sold. Yeah. I didn't ask questions. And so anytime you can't ask a question or you get pushback, that is a red flag. So if they can't answer the question, are boys allowed in the girls' bathrooms? If they can't answer the question, do you have a DEI office? If they can't answer the question, is your policy ever to keep a secret from parents under any circumstance? Do you make any referrals to Planned Parenthood or any outside, entities without my knowledge or consent? Yeah. Can I opt out of sex ed? If you can't answer these questions, it's a no.
And parents need to be asking these questions. Like parents need to be involved. And not only that, you mentioned something about friends. When it comes to the friends that your children have, are you vetting these kids too and making sure that they're good influences and staying in touch with the parents and making sure that you know how these families are? I ask because I'm so shocked by how many parents don't do that. Right. I've had kids who come over to my house, and obviously we're a safe house, but parents don't check in. Like their kids just come over and they don't see if I'm home. They don't see what's going on. They don't know what type of person I am. And it shocks me.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. That's the hard part is not every parent, cares to the same extent or isn't as involved. Or some parents will make you feel like you're overbearing or, don't worry about it, So for us, like we don't do sleepovers. That's just not a risk that we need to take. We can do like a late night movie hang, but there's just no need to sleep over. So the risks, a lot of children have been abused at sleepovers. And I think there's a recent story where a dad, I think he drugged all the girls at the party and, touched them and violated them. So, these are just basic risks that don't take away from their social life. Like they can still have friends, they can still get together, but just basic risks like that, or never being alone with somebody's parent, without you knowing who they are or consenting to that situation. I think that's really what it has to do with. And we approach all of these issues, and you asked this, and I should have answered it better earlier, is with our kids, we're very honest, very open with all these issues. And in some cases we had to be as public figures that took a lot of heat, backlash, vitriol from the public, from media. We had to equip our kids because they're our children and they're having to deal with a lot of this. But I think that it strengthened them. And I think also that open dialogue constantly, like it's not that we enjoy talking about politics, but we believe in them. We believe in this next generation that if they are equipped and they're involved and they feel entitled to the experiences that they have and how they're governed and the decisions that are made in their life, and to teach them to care about others as well in their community. I think it's actually really interesting. Like we have a lot of really interesting debates and inquiries in our car. Like we're not talking about celebrities and shows. We're talking about like, hey, we have this water problem in our city. All right, we only have this amount of money to fix it. Liam, you go. What do you think we should do? And it's like, it's fun for us. So maybe we're a weird family, but like we like to problem solve and challenge each other. And sometimes our kids surprise us because they challenge us on a position we feel pretty firmly about. And we go, wow, like, this is really what it means to raise critically thinking kids, is to equip them to know how to respond when a situation happens, when they're at a friend's house and somebody pulls up porn. Do they know how to respond? Do they already have the language? Have you role played that in the car? And we just talk very direct about it. Like, yeah, there are bad pictures and good pictures. There's a great book about this. There's plenty of resources on Freedom Forever site too for parents. Should add that. But we have tools. We have ways to talk to them about this. So we're not talking down to them, but we're talking with them about the risks that they're already going to be exposed to in the real world. So they're not scared and they're not ill-equipped to deal with it, and that they know that we're a safe place to land and that they can trust us to come talk to us when these things happen.
Yeah, we have to be talking to them, right? Because when they move out of our house, the world is going to hit them smack dab in the face and it's going to come at them hot. And,
Right.
there's all these things. If you haven't had these conversations, they're not necessarily going to know how to handle it. So we have to have these conversations with them. Obviously, at age appropriate levels, you're not going to
Yeah.
talk to a 7-year-old the same way you're going to talk to a 16 or 17-year-old.
Right.
Landon, I'm so enjoying the conversation, but I know that we're running low on time, and I end every podcast episode with a question and ask how you would encourage others to speak out. How would you tell somebody who agrees with you that, like, they're listening to this in the car, they're like, yes, I agree with this, go Landon. But they don't feel comfortable maybe asking the school teacher or the school principal, do you have a DEI office? Or they don't feel comfortable speaking up when it comes to sex trafficking, even though in their heart they know that's right. What piece of advice would you give people to encourage them to speak out?
Right. Well, I would ask questions. I had to do this when I had my own awakening of who I wanted to be, the mother I wanted to be, and the life I wanted to leave for my children. And I had to ask myself, was it more important about what the world thought of me, what friends thought of me, social status, money, jobs, or who I was on the inside, standing up for the right values in life? And I think of, especially being a Christian, like, what's the point of being a Christian? What's the point of being even a good person of values and of moral character? What's the point of even teaching it to our kids? What's the point of any of that if we are afraid to use that, to actually stand up to be that? It's like you're holding these private views, but what's the point of doing that if you're living a complete, opposite life of what that is, and teaching and modeling to our kids how to lie to conform to society? That's the sadder story here, is that our children are watching us. They're watching how we respond to conflict. Do we shrivel, cower, run away, or do we feel confident in what we believe, what we say we believe and teach to our children at home is actually what we practice out in the real world? Because that's exactly the behaviors and mindsets that they're going to adopt. And so, the last thing that I would say is, when you do listen to that voice that I believe is stirring in so many, where they just want to, but they're scared. When you do listen to that voice on the other side, there will be hard things, but there's freedom. There's freedom. There's no greater freedom than breaking outside the prison of what other people think of you. And when you really arrive there, not only does it strengthen you spiritually, because you know that you only care and serve God, you're not a slave to men and what they think or what they say to you or do. Like, then there really is no power in there anymore. You really don't care what they say or do anymore. So that's available to everyone, if they simply exercise their freedoms. And I think you can take that to the extent of America across the board, is so many people were afraid to stand up, during the lockdowns. And, how free we are and how free we remain in America is really dependent on how free we are as individuals.
I think that we find when we speak out, there's a lot of people who agree with us. That maybe there are other people who are silent, but it's that loud minority that, kind of can intimidate us into silence. But when we actually do speak out, we realize there's so many people who agree with us. And not only that, but if we're not standing up for what we believe in, how do we expect our children to ever do that? When it comes to school or being around their friends, or maybe when they're young adults, like, we have to model that and show them. So I think what you said is completely spot on. You hit it right on the nail. Landon, thank you so much for joining. Tell everybody how they can find you. I know you've got multiple other things going on, and then your husband is also an activist in this way and does a lot of the same things with you. So you're this like super awesome, dynamic husband-wife duo that I love. But where can everybody find you? Where can they follow you? Where can they find the War on Children? All of these things.
Well, thank you so much for having me on your podcast, Christine. It was awesome talking to you. And everyone can find me. thewaronchildren.com is our film. So that's all the ways to watch the film. Go to thewaronchildren.com. My nonprofit is freedomforever.us. And you can get that free Parenting Revolution manual by subscribing. And you can follow me on all the socials at Landon Starbuck.
Thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate having you.
Thank you so much.